We're back now with the president of the NCAA, Dr. Mark Emmert. And Dr. Emmert, I think it's fair to say this was a surprise. It was a bombshell when the National Labor Relations Board ruled last week that college football players at Northwestern had the right to unionize. Now, it's my understanding you think this would basically be a disaster for college sports.
Well, I certainly, like I think many people, understand the need for people to pay attention to and be concerned about the welfare of student athletes. That's what the NCAA was created for 100 years ago, and that's what we keep our attention on. But I don't think that unionizing student athletes and turning them into unionized employees of universities is a way to improve their success. So no, we're not particularly fond of that.
What would happen if they declared them to be employees? I guess that would mean their scholarships would be considered wages, they would be taxed.
Yeah, I assume so as well. So if you look at Northwestern, for example, the value of a scholarship, tuition fees, room and board, books and supplies that they get's around $75,000 a year. So we assume that becomes taxable. But more importantly, it completely changes the relationship from a student who's there to get an education and enjoy all the benefits of being a student at a place like Northwestern to being an employee. We don't even know what that looks like. If they drop a ball, do they get fired? How do you recruit them? Do you hire them? Do you trade them? I mean, what does that relationship look like is anyone's guess now.
But aren't you going to have to do something? I mean, this has now become a multi-billion-dollar industry, and people say, look, everybody's making money out of this, but the students themselves, and that they're being used. They're not being treated fairly.
Yeah, so the real, to me at least, and I'm sure this is true for our more than 1,100 member universities and colleges, the game changer for a young person in life is that they get an education. We know that means they'll make $1 million more than they would have otherwise. So if we're making sure that the focus is on students getting an education, graduating from a university without debt, without any burdens on them, and they go on into the world and they're successful because of what they learned as a student athlete and what they gain in the classroom, that's the real game changer for them. The billions of dollars that come in, and it is a very large amount of money that universities receive for intercollegiate athletics in two sports, football and basketball, that also is what drives and pays for all of the other expenses in intercollegiate athletics. So track and field, soccer, women's volleyball, women's basketball, all of those sports are paid for by the revenue that comes in from two sports that drive all of that activity. So the notion that somehow universities are taking that money and putting it in the bank is utterly erroneous. They're using it to pay for nearly 500,000 student athletes.
But what happens to those other sports? Would they continue on if these people are declared to be employees rather than athletes?
Well, they'd be deeply threatened, to say the least, because of the change in that relationship. And I'm not sure how you can rule that a student athlete who spends as much time as our student athletes do in women's basketball is different than one in men's basketball. The time commitment's the same, the work's the same, their dedication's the same. If one's a unionized athlete and an employee, then I suspect the other is as well.
Where do you think this is going? Do you think it finally winds up in the Supreme Court?
Yes, I think it does. It so fundamentally changes the nature of what college sport is about. And it blows up what is one of America's iconic activities. I think it winds up in the Supreme Court.
Are these students really student athletes? Because after all, some of them are working, when you add up their practice time, 50 hours a week. They're different than the other students who go to school. There's no question about that.
Yeah, you're right. There's no question about it. And I think one of the things that the NCAA and our member universities have to address is how much time demands are being placed on successful student athletes. Across the board, they commit an enormous amount of time, and unfortunately it begins in the 6th grade these days. We have kids playing sports 12 months out of the year, and I think we as a society need to rebalance that a lot.
Well, can you think of any solutions, any reforms, any way that maybe these kids could share in what's happening here in college sports now?
Sure. There's a lot of things that we need to do, and the members are actively engaged in looking for changes. One, we've been talking about increasing the size of a scholarship to cover, in our jargon, full cost of attendance, which would add several $1,000s worth of resources to all the scholarships. We're talking about those time constraints and can we get them to be more reasonable, because again, the game changer for life is getting that degree and that education. 3, we need to make sure that we're doing everything humanly possible around health and wellness and the support of student athletes around their well-being. Those things and a handful of others, I think, are critical changes that are well in the works right now, and we'll see that happen in the next few months.
All right. Well, Doctor, thank you so much. This
Thank
is
you.
a very interesting situation. We'll be coming back to this story as it continues to develop and getting some other views down the road. For now, I'll be right back with some personal